Welcome to our monthly ACTS Town Hall. Thanks to our member companies for helping make these town halls possible. Your support makes our mission a reality. Together in safety, stronger in collaboration. The ACTS Town Halls are an open forum to discuss concerns and present potential solutions to improve damage prevention and excavation safety. These town halls are meant to be a discussion, and you're encouraged to ask questions and share solutions. A recording of this town hall will be posted on our YouTube channel and sent via email after the town hall has concluded. Before the end of the town hall, each of our panelists will highlight a moving forward step to ensure we stay focused on practical and impactful solutions. We are pleased to have a knowledgeable and experienced panel with us today. So to get us started, our moderator will begin with brief introductions.
Hi, good morning. I'm Janetta Cravens, and I will be your moderator today for this discussion on high performance board culture. One of the unique features of this industry is that we all have, or we are governed by and work with a board of directors. And so we're going to explore the practical and tactical ways that board of directors can contribute to the high performance culture of their organization. So as we get started, I want to contribute that high performance boards go beyond just mere compliance and the basic legal responsibilities of a board of directors. Boards of directors, when high functioning, they are a catalyst for some of the most important strategies that the organization will consider. They also help to set the tone for the organization by modeling ethical and good business practices. And they help the organization's leadership make meaning, like not just decisions, but make meaning for an organization by providing valuable insights and perspectives and generative thinking to contribute to the agency's most core initiatives. So quality board experience are stewarded by intention. If you have a good board, it's because you have worked to cultivate it. And but practices that engage and contribute to a good board culture are as varied and as different as the organizations that have them. So the panel of experts that we have gathered for you today, we're going to share experiences that represent a wide range from within our field, from CEOs who have lengthy experience in working with boards of directors to board members in the network, as well as consultants and practitioners in the field who offer considerable insights into the working practices of our governance process. So I'm very excited for the conversation today. As we discuss together the topics, I encourage you to use the chat to both engage with the panel. We look forward to hearing your reactions and your contributing thoughts to the topics as we explore them, and also your questions. So that'll be where we looked for additional information that you'd like for us to expound on as we're talking about it. But before we dive into the discussion, I want to briefly introduce you to the panel and let them share a little bit more about themselves. Representing our boards are the position of a board member is Drew Miller, and Drew is the Director of Operations at Oklahoma Natural Gas. And Drew, would you like to bring a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm on the Okie 811 board for with Susan, who's also on the panel today. Been on the board for a little over a year. My background comes from the natural gas world with Oklahoma Natural Gas, engineering background as well, but have been involved in the damage prevention world for the past 6 years and have really enjoyed my time getting to help progress damage prevention for Oklahoma.
Thank you, Drew. Looking forward to the conversation today with you. Representing our CEOs are Susan Bowl with Okie 811 and Roger, who is the President and Executive Director of Ohio 811. So I'd love to invite you to share a little bit more about yourselves. Susan, would you like to start?
Sure. Susan Bowl. Like you said, I'm the Executive Director for Okie 811. I've been in my position here for a little over 11 years. And when I got here, the board was very disengaged from the perspective of being involved in, where we needed them to be involved in their work. So I'm excited to share how we've cultivated a really good board, and bringing on great people like Drew has really helped with that.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, Roger. How about?
Hi. Thanks everyone for your patience. I lost my voice yesterday. So, executive director, president, 20 years, here at Ohio 1, about 40 years in the industry, worked in excavation, locate, utility services. So, have worked from the ditch to the boardroom. Have been on a number of boards on a national level in various capacities over the years. So I look forward to the discussion today.
Roger, thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here, and we will bear with you and listen intently as we as we work with you and your laryngitis. So thank you. Well, I also want to introduce my colleague, Kim Leverage, who is also here today, bringing additional insights from the wider nonprofit community. I've worked with Kim for many years, and I know her to be an expert in leadership and governance, and is one of the senior consultants on our firm. So, Kim, would you like to share a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you, Janetta, and welcome everyone. It's good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm an organizational psychologist that has spent my career working in team development, organizational development, executive coaching. I've worked in the energy industry, done different types of consulting in the past, and had the pleasure of working in the nonprofit sector for about 10 years now. And specifically, both as a board member and in working with boards and their dynamics and culture changes that need to happen. So, that's the perspective I'll bring to you.
Thank you, Kim. Well, last but not least, I'll share a little bit more about myself. I'm Janetta Cravens, and I'm the president and CEO of Co-Spire Consulting, which is a firm that believes that agencies that are governed with a board of directors provide invaluable services and life-saving processes for our individuals and our communities. We work nationally and globally with nonprofit and government agencies that are that span a wide geographic region. Our goal is to help these organizations in a collaborative pursuit of potential. So we work deeply with each organization to help them achieve their goal. And a lot of times that starts with conversations with the board of directors who are stewarding the mission and the impact of the organization. We are looking forward to bringing a more in-depth conversation around this at the upcoming conference. And so I encourage you to check out our session there where we will be providing even more theory and practice around the concepts of a high-performing board culture. All right, so I want to get us started with the discussion. And to tee us off, I want to talk about engagement. Like when I work with a nonprofit organization, one of the most consistent themes that I hear is that they want an engaged board. Executive directors want their board members to be engaged. Board members want their colleagues and peers on the board to be engaged, so that way there's equal sharing among the board. But engagement is sort of a nebulous word, and I would love to hear from each of you as to what does engagement mean? What does it mean when we say we want to have a good, engaged board?
I'll go first, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, great, Susan.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a board that works well together. They know each other. It's hard because they all work for even competing organizations, right? I'll have a Verizon guy on my board and a Cox guy on my board, and those organizations tend to compete with each other in certain degrees. But on the board, they collaborate very well together. They know their position on the board and that they're there to oversee one organization and our operations. So knowing each other, holding each other accountable is another piece of engagement where I'm not, as the executive director, not having to go to the board member saying, you're not participative, you're not attending. They hold each other accountable. So that I like the fact that that happens with them, and I don't have to be the one that has to go and do that.
Susan, I want to put a pin in that because I think you've said something really important that I'd like to circle back around to, which is how a board holds each other accountable to that high culture. So I just want you to know I wrote that down. I'd like for us to return to that thought. What might other so Susan offered collaboration, holding each other accountable, and also doing that within a willing spirit when we have oftentimes competing professional goals inside the boardroom. We're peers supporting a common purpose. So, what are some other ways that engagement that engagement is necessary for this high performing board culture?
If
Roger, hi. Sure.
Yeah, I'll sorry, I'm going to struggle through this. Okay.
Well, take your time.
One of the things that we have here in Ohio is a board development committee. And the board development committee is run by board members. We do a board orientation for all new board members and alternates coming in. Part of that orientation is helping them understand their role and their responsibilities. It's to help them understand when they should be wearing that competitive member hat and when they should be wearing a hat that's focused on the board itself. The other thing that we do is a mentoring program. So every new board member for a period of time has an older board member who's a mentor. And so before each meeting, each quarterly meeting, they meet with that mentor and kind of go over the agenda. We also have a number of subcommittees on our board where these subcommittees are meeting each quarter prior to the meeting and reporting out to the board. All of this helps our engagement. We struggled when I first got here 20 years ago with engagement issues. You had that small group of board members who were really effective, but the rest of them were just along for the ride. And so this is how we adjusted. This is how we kind of moved forward to get engaged board members. And today, I'm very happy to say that we have more engagement than I've ever seen on any board that I've been associated with from these folks, especially considering, like Susan pointed out, they've got different agendas. But to get them on the same page with an agenda of what's best for this business is really what's important. And I think some of that comes through the peer-to-peer connection that Susan talked about. A lot of that comes through holding each other accountable and then setting a culture of seeing people as people. The Verizon guy shouldn't see the Cox guy as that Cox guy. He should see him as whatever his name is, right? I should see Susan as Susan. She should see me as Roger, regardless of what our differences are, because there's a number of those things that I'm sure we're in alignment on. And so that's the culture that we try to project here. And it starts from the day they become a board member and hit that first orientation.
Thank
So
you, Roger.
I know that's a lot of stuff, but that's probably all you're going to get out of me the rest of the day. So.
Yeah,
Thanks,
right.
Roger. We'll return. We'll return to some of those thoughts too. What about Drew or Kim? What are your thoughts on this idea? Yeah.
So, kind of going off of what both Susan and Roger have talked about, that one of the first things that Susan does a great job with Okie Board is sitting down with the new oncoming board members and having a discussion about what it means to be on that board, what it means to be engaged, and to be able to support Okie 811. And then we actually took an opportunity to do a board retreat as well that allowed us, like Roger's talking about, to learn about each other. Instead of it being Cox versus Verizon, it was understanding where everybody was coming from, even talking about some pretty opening personal things that gave us the ability to learn a little bit deeper about the why people are involved in this board and what their drive is. And that gives us, from the board perspective, a whole lot better engagement to be able to see more in depth than just the company and actually get down deeper into the personal level, that then we can find commonalities. Instead of talking about the differences that we have, we can actually find the commonalities that we have.
Thank you. Thank you, Drew.
This was all really good. I would just add that I was thinking about, as you all spoke, this idea of a team and how a team is successful. Teams are successful by each person, holding their role and doing the thing that they're supposed to do, working together in a unified way towards something, right? So teams are more successful when they're engaged with each other, when they know what the other person might do in the same scenario. So the engagement piece really helps to empower the board to move the organization forward in ways that they wouldn't be able to if there wasn't the engagement.
No, thank you, Kim. I really appreciate you bringing in that team metaphor, which applies to sports, theater, performing arts, all sorts of settings. And so playing on that, I want to, so what is then a characteristic of a good team member? An engaged board member looks like what? Like I'm thinking, I'll preface it by saying, as you all were talking, I was thinking, well, that means that an engaged board member is attentive, right? That they're thinking on multiple horizons and planes with the organization. Yes, they're thinking about the way that they contribute to the conversation as a representative of their agency, but they're also thinking laterally across the board to their peers and colleagues. So they're attentive to multiple dimensions of conversations that affect the organization. What else might be characteristics of an engaged board member so that we would know what it looks like when it shows up? Yeah, Roger.
Roger,
Go ahead.
You very quickly can determine if this is going to be a new board member is going to be engaged when they show up prepared. They've read the materials. They've asked the questions. They've reached out in between meetings to try to better understand something that they see on the agenda. Or if they don't understand something that was talked about at a meeting, they contact you afterwards. They quickly respond to meeting invitations. These are all signs that you have an engaged board member, and you need to celebrate that, and you need to promote that. And in some cases, when you have a board member who's not engaged, you may need to shame them by pointing out what a great board member this other fella is, or this other lady is, right? So it's really that kind of thing. And I think once you start to get more board members engaged, like Susan said, we as the senior executives can step back, and it perpetuates itself amongst the board, makes our job so much easier.
Well, thank you, Roger. What other insights would you all say to that question?
I was going to say beyond attendance. That was one of the first things Susan mentioned when she was speaking first, was about attendance. And I think it's beyond, right? I think attendance is like the minimum requirement that we all have. So it has to do with, as Roger said, asking good questions, participating in conversation, reviewing materials that are sent to us so that we are fully informed, that type of thing. So it's beyond attendance.
I can tell you for my perspective, it's outside the boardroom too. There are times that I get called by legislators or state agencies. They want me to come in and battle out some idea that they have, or talk about these things that they're struggling with, or pipeline reinforcement things that are happening in Oklahoma. And I can call my board member, a couple of them, and say, hey, I want you to go with me to this meeting. And they're always, yes, I'll be there. So it's outside the boardroom too, where you can pull in your board members to attend these kind of other things that are happening in the state or even in the industry. I invite them to come to some of the conferences with me to give them a bigger picture of the industry, let them see it's beyond just Oklahoma 811. There's all these other facility notification centers across the US and Canada that and the world that are a part of our industry, and help them see the bigger picture of things.
Thank you for bringing in that perspective that's needed. Yeah, Roger, go ahead. And then I'll go to Drew.
I'm sorry, Drew. Sorry,
it's okay.
Drew. If I could just tag on to what Susan's saying, helping them understand that bigger picture, helping them understand the bigger picture pays dividends over and over, because they realize that they're serving a cause greater than themselves. It's beyond their company. It's beyond their participation on our board. It's keeping not just the 11 plus million citizens of Ohio safe, it's keeping citizens across the country safe. And so I just wanted to emphasize what Susan had said there. Very important to engage those board members on that global level as well. Sorry, Drew.
No, thank you. Drew.
No, I think Susan hit on earlier, accountability with the board members, and that obviously comes, that comfort level comes with relationship building. But holding each other accountable and understanding what hat you're wearing whenever you're sitting in that board meeting, and that is a very difficult challenge as you're trying to represent the interest of your company, but also the best interest of the board that you're sitting on. And if those conflict, you have to figure out that at that point in time, if you are on that board, that you are going to have to represent the interest of the board and work through that process together.
I love it. I wrote some notes as you all were talking, and I'm going to drop it in the chat because I think you all created a really nice little, a comprehensive list of what engaged can mean. So I'm just going to drop that in for viewers to consider as we dive deeper into this, that because I think a lot of times we talk to board members about the tactical pieces of board service, how many meetings they need to attend, other ways that they're contributing, that what we value is the character piece that they bring to the conversation, the attentiveness, the responsiveness, the sincere interest and engagement. And those are oftentimes harder things to communicate in a board orientation or a or a board mentoring program, though I'm, glad that here, Roger, you have some of those practices. But I think, I'm hearing a lot of boards that are striving to talk about the strategic attentiveness that they need board members to have, in addition to, again, those kind of compliance, attend meetings as the bare minimum. So I want to tie in. I want to pivot just a little bit, but it really ties into the conversation we were just having. And I want to talk about the board and CEO partnership. Susan, you mentioned that you often call on board members outside of meetings to help support important conversations that are happening, especially at the legislative level. So I want to tie into that a little bit more. From a CEO's perspective, what does the chief leader need from the board of directors in order to feel sustained? We said that when a board knows their roles and their responsibilities, it makes the job of the CEO easier. So how is that? What is it that the CEO needs most from their board to contribute to that sustainability in their leadership position?
Well, it's a balance. You want a board that's involved to the point where they understand what's happening organizationally, but that they're not involved in the operations of the organization. In other words, if we're developing our budget for the next year and we're talking about we need this much for salaries, I don't need them in the weeds of who's making how much, right? I just need them to say at the high level, this is what we need for salary budgets. And I feel like, yes, it's my role to justify and explain and offer clarification if there's confusion about anything. But it's also, I want to make sure the board is not in the weeds of the operations as well. So it's a balance. What I need from my board is to know where that fine line is and where they need to stay at that 30,000 foot level and let me run the operation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. So how do you do that, Susan? How do board members most effectively meet that need to stay at a higher operating level and not get down into the weeds of managing?
Well, I'm going to defer to Drew. How do you feel like you manage that from a board member's perspective?
I think it partially comes with trust of the CEO or the executive director of that board or of that company. You've got to have trust that they are presenting the information that you need to make informed decisions, and there's not the need to dig into the details. And speaking for Susan, and she talked about in the past how there was not an engaged board, and what that looks like now, and the strides that Oki has taken to continue to advance their processes and the company overall. But I think it 100% comes with trust, and having the information that you need to be able to make those decisions.
Mm.
And having the trust also, I love that you said that, Drew, because it's about, as an executive, I still need to be transparent with my board as much as I can without them getting into the weeds of things. But being transparent leads to trust as well, because then they know, okay, she's being transparent about these things. She's telling me what I need to know to make informed decisions. And I trust that this is going to take off in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Susan. Roger.
If I could, I typically sum up what Susan said to my board. There can only be one cook in the kitchen, right? So I tell them I need their nose in, smelling the great smells, and I need their hands out. When I was a little boy and we went to the store, my mom told me I could look at everything as long as my hands were in my pockets. I touched nothing. And so I'm joking, but basically helping the board understand my role is this and your role is that. The board, for me, especially now, Drew touched on something very important. If you can't trust your senior executive, you got deeper problems in an organization. And the senior executive has to be transparent, but you also have to be firm in the fact that you probably have a better perspective on the business than a part-time board member has, right? So the board sets the strategic direction for the organization, what they want it to look like when it grows up. To deliver on that, you got to trust that your CEO is doing that. So I think it's understanding the differences in those roles. That's part of where that orientation comes in. But every now and then you'll get the board members who are hands-on in their business, and they want to be hands-on in the center. And that's where the conflict comes from, right? This is my swim lane. That's your swim lane. But as long as we do that, we're going to complement each other. But I think it really starts with an organization's strategic plan, your strategic direction, because everything else flows from that. And that's where you can build that trust. That's where you can build that transparency. That's where you can show results. And that's the other thing. Building that trust is part of having an executive director or senior executive that shows results. So, I mean, it naturally, organically takes place if you put those foundational pieces in there. So nose in, hands out. It's wonderful.
Thanks, Roger. And I also hear within that your contribution of the strategic plan as the catalyst for guiding to ensure that the executive and the board are working together, that we're all pulling in the same direction. And with that clarification, we can be committed to the same purposes and the same goals, and how important that is in creating a trusting and committed environment.
And Drew touched on that. Drew touched on that. When Drew said, how do you struggle between your company hat and your, how do I support it? Well, that strategic plan becomes your guiding light. That's where Drew, as a board member, can say, okay, does this fit in with our strategic direction that we all agree to? Even though it's in conflict with what my company may believe, I'm going to serve the strategic direction that we as the board set and that the CEO is delivering on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the purpose that we're here to steward is the organization that we serve on as a board member. Yeah. Kim, I want to just invite you in. Are there some thoughts that you have about what the board?
I had two small thoughts. One was I'm hearing a theme of relationships. So I just kind of wanted to pull that in. That's where, the trust comes in, the holding each other accountable. And I think we have to, what we're kind of dancing around there a little bit is the relationships we all have with each other. But I also thought, as we were all talking, that one of the roles that the board has, and specifically, I think the board chair with the CEO is providing protection. So the board is making sure that the environment is good for success for this organization. And I think there's some protection there that is provided for the CEO through, as Roger mentioned, strategy, through these relationships, through knowing what the board chair, what the executive needs the board.
Yes, thank you for that. So let's tie in a little bit to this concept that Drew introduced early on, and that we've kind of teased on just here, which is that board members play a collective role as colleagues on the board, but they also are representatives of their companies or their municipalities. And so what role can a board member play in advocating for their organization or their company within the organization of the board of directors? Why does that representative presence matter to the board, and how can we utilize that to be effective for the overall governance picture? So how can we utilize as board members' individual connections with those companies or communities that they're a part of to serve the organization? And what's an appropriate way to do that when there is sometimes competitive agendas in the room?
Yeah, so I think the biggest important thing is understanding the diversity that everybody brings in from their own arenas, whether it's pipeline, telecommunications, electric, and understanding that the common goal that you would have as a board member. And even though there are differences, that ultimately there are commonalities that I talked about earlier, but the diversity that we bring from the board member perspective and that we bring into all of the conversations and the accountability that we have in those conversations, that we're not always going to agree on everything, but we still have to find a way to continue to move forward and to support the strategic plan of Okie 811, of your boards that you're supporting.
Thank you, Drew.
One of the things that we identified a few years ago was that we needed more representation from the different underground facility operators across Oklahoma, and we didn't have a representative for municipalities. And here we were talking about trying to get to a one ticket fee for everybody when municipalities were getting a cheaper ticket. And we needed someone on our board that we could vet these things with, that we could say, is this realistic? Can this happen? What impact would this have if we did this? And so we grew our board from 8 to 12 representatives, and strategically and focused on where we need a representation. So that helps as well when you can make sure you have the right representation. You're able to vet things more holistically when you're doing those strategic thinking and those strategic things. So it's definitely something, if you're not looking at your board representation, you should be, and making sure you have the right voices on there.
Mm-hmm. Roger.
I'll just piggyback on, excuse me, I'll piggyback on what both of them said, and that is the diversity. I've watched board members learn about other industries from that conversation, right? So we're trying to make a decision that may affect one industry in a negative way. Well, if we were making that in a vacuum without representation, it would be pretty devastating. But having that there, I have watched board members from the bigger utilities bend their opinions and positions based on what a municipal is saying, or based on what an oil and gas producer is saying. So I think Susan and Drew hit it. It's got to be the thing that they each bring is that diverse background. And if you have a board that's willing to hear each other, you will make better decisions as an organization because you're making them from that broader perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Roger.
This feels a little bit like an onboarding topic for when we bring our board members on. Making sure that board members understand this is what we want from you. Is to encourage that engagement. It also feels like an opportunity to educate the liaisons that serve the organizations who bring us board members on the philosophy that we want to have when they're selecting folks within their organization. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think that gets also ties back nicely to that character piece we mentioned a minute ago. So how do we recruit board members that can get us into this representative framework, but they have to have the right frame of mind when they're on the board, because we're not inviting board members just to champion their own agendas. We have to have mature people who can speak to that balance of representation, but also mutual support and stewardship of the mission and the strategic plan. So how do we talk with our agencies who help us find board members to achieve that? Because sometimes we don't always have direct control over who is selected from a company and represents that company to our board. How do we frame that?
Yeah, it's a challenge for us in the way we look at our board seats is the board seat belongs to the underground facility operator company. So in Drew's case, the board seat belongs to O&G. O&G then tells us who they want in that seat. So it's a little challenging to say, oh, I want a female, I want a Black person, I want a man, I want whatever diverse thing that we're trying to do. It becomes a little bit more challenging. What I've done recently when a board member says that they're resigning from the seat and they're going to be replacing themselves with somebody, I try to say, well, this is what we need on the board. If you're able to recruit someone from your organization that fits these things, one of those things being higher level representation in their company. Maybe they're a manager or a director. In Drew's case, he's a director. Though you need someone that is going to be more at that strategic visionary level. When you tend to get someone that's a boots on the ground guy on your board, they're down in the weeds. They want to talk about how someone hit their water main and took out the sewer system to the municipalities, and they want to get down into that kind of level. And so it's hard because I want to say I will need somebody at a director level or above when that company can put whoever they want in that seat, really, for the most part. But it's just a conversation, and it's an ask, and it's something that we need to, as CEOs and EDs, make sure we're going in there and making those asks and making those requests. We may not get what we ask for, but at least we can try.
It sounds again like that comes back to the relationships that we have.
Yeah.
Roger, it sounds like you are ready to share some thoughts here.
So this is where having an effective board alternate program comes in. So every one of our 21 board members are required to have an alternate. And so as a board member leaves, it's easy to bring those alternates on. Okay. So that alternate's already participated in committees. They've already participated in board meetings. They've been through the orientation. They've signed the commitment to serve. So they understand that role and responsibility. So it helps with business continuity. It helps with board continuity by having an effective alternate program to your board. The other thing that we have in place here in Ohio is the ability to vet it. Susan's right. The member company owns the seat. They can put a candidate forward, but we have the ability, our board has the ability to vet that candidate and say, can you give us a different representative? Can you give us somebody who is of this? Ideally, I'd love to have director level and above on my board. Unfortunately, in Ohio, of my 21, that's not always going to happen. But us retaining the ability to say, thank you for that candidate, we've determined that that candidate doesn't have the skills or the qualifications that we need at this level. Can you give us a different representative? Is that fail safe? But I think an effective alternate program, a functioning alternate program, helps you deal with these departures
Mhm.
much easier.
Well, it sounds like having some sort of a succession plan, whether that is, in Susan's case, a conversation with an exiting board member about how they can use their relationships within their company to be considerate in finding their seat, or in Roger's case, a more formalized program that is that creates a rhythm of exchange that includes alternate board members for each of the seats. So, but both of what you all have offered is the importance of being intentional about it. And that there's a maintenance quality to that relationship. I want to hear from Drew or Kim. Do you all have other thoughts to contribute to this question that we're discussing?
So I think one way that I would look at this, so Susan's right that probably the worst analogy to this is that it's an arranged marriage that uh, she did not get to select me. Luckily, I'm great. I do everything that she wants me to do. But no, just all jokes aside, I think there are opportunities with some of the subcommittees that happen within the organizations as well, that it is a glimpse of individuals, but it's also very important for the executive to have good relationships outside of just the board member with the companies, that if that person does happen to leave, that there are other contacts potentially with the company, that they can have those type of open discussions like Roger's talking about, where it's,
Mhm.
hey, this person is not what we're needing in the role at this point in time. Can you recommend someone else? And that only comes with the relationship building with the executives and the companies.
Mhm. Thank you, Drew. Kim,
But
what
just
are
say this sounds like an opportunity for boards to be strategic about how this is done, and maybe think about how to support the executive on bringing in board members that make sense for the future of the organization.
Mhm. Thanks. So I want to talk a little bit about how a board spends its time and how we help a board member get ready for these discussions. We've talked a little bit about the importance of having a board orientation so that board members can accumulate and understand what is expected of them as a board member. I would invite you to either extrapolate on that a little bit. How do you set up a good orientation so that board members have the knowledge that they need in order to govern effectively? Or you could also talk about how we structure time in meetings so that the generative and strategic discussions are infused into that experience. And so that we're moving the board meeting itself from just beyond the compliance of kind of a yes and no voting into a space where we're sharing ideas and perspectives, and board members feel at liberty to share their voice and share their perspectives in that setting, which is another way to also orient board members, because it's an ongoing, on the job training type environment. So how do we help board members be prepared to serve, so that they are engaged and they understand what's expected of them?
Well, I think the orientation is a piece of it. I think doing a board retreat each year with your board to get them outside of the boardroom and doing more networking type activities with them. We had Kim come in and do a board retreat with us last August, and she did some different exercises where we went through and learned about each other and got to know each other in ways that I would never even have thought about asking for that kind of insight and input from folks. So it's really good to do, an annual retreat possibly with your board to help them get to know each other. You get to know them better. That trust is being built. It goes beyond just bringing them, onboarding them and saying, okay, now you're a board member. Constantly be thinking about how do we engage them, and how do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them wanting to be a board member and not feeling like they're being put upon every time we have a board meeting? So It's investing in your board as equally as you do your staff.
That's an important statement, Susan. I just want to highlight that.
One thing to add to Susan's comments on the retreat that we went through, just for some background, I really think there was a lot of value in having a facilitator like Kim come in, and it kind of created a safe space for everybody to talk. And it wasn't just Susan trying to get into everybody's personal details and trying to figure out more about us as board members. It was actually a very open environment, and that facilitator seemed to really help out in the retreat and us being outside of the boardroom and kind of, we were in street clothes. We weren't sitting, in a very professional environment, but it was really good overall to have someone else come in to help facilitate that conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, Drew.
So if I can just add, I want to build, excuse me, sorry. I want to,
Right.
hang on a second. Hey, this is fun. You're loving this, aren't you, Susan? Okay. To build on what they're saying, in Ohio, and I've had this on other boards, that social aspect is very important. So when we go to our strategic planning, it's a multi-day thing, and we'll have a social event. We'll go to Top Golf, or we'll go bowling, or we'll do those axe throwing. We'll do those kind of things. But we're also, you don't know how much work gets done over breakfast or dinner. So where a lot of organizations come in at 10 o'clock and their meeting's done at 2, and they may have a working lunch, we come in at noon the day before. We'll have dinner that night. We'll have breakfast. We'll do the meeting the next day, and we'll go from there. And a lot of times that dinner at night involves some social activities. So keying off of what Drew and Susan have said, I can't tell you how much board work, how much relationship building, how much camaraderie and teamwork and feeling like you're part of something larger than yourself takes place in those environments. Our strategic planning, like their retreat, always has that social aspect. One of the things that Drew just said that makes me really proud is that we're the same way. You're in jeans, you're in shorts, you're in a relaxed mode, and you can be people, and it doesn't require that. The other thing that we do is we do a lot with intent-based leadership in Ohio. We do a lot with the DISC program. When we DISCed our board, when we did the DISC for our board, and they started understanding why some of the conflicts between them were occurring, now they quit holding each other, they quit seeing it personal, and started seeing, well, that's just Susan. She's a high C. I'm a high D. We're going to have some conflict, right? And so they started seeing each other differently. So it's that awareness, that self-awareness, the self-development that we can provide as the senior executives to our group that they may not be getting in their member companies. We have seen huge dividends from that. And that's part of our strategic planning and retreat as well. So I know that was a little long-winded, but those that know me know that I can be that way. But
Thanks, Roger.
But I think that's an important piece of it.
Yeah. I want to draw in, and this will be our final question, but I think it's an important one around engagement. You all just mentioned that going on a retreat, having time for lunches and breakfast, like when we have extended time together, we can do the diligent work of reflection and generative thinking, which sometimes can't come out when we're in under the time constraints of a standard meeting. And so if you have done a board retreat or a board governance assessment where the board has also looked at data about themselves and used that reflective experience to adjust practices, what are some of the ahas that came out of working with a facilitator, having that reflective time and experience that ended up serving the organization? Yet I know it built teams and it built relationships, but how else did it contribute to maybe a shifting practice within the board or within the organization because they had the time together to reflect and think about their experience?
we have seen much more give and take, where before you had board members that were always trying to get, now they're giving more. So I think it's that self-awareness of who you are and the awareness of who those are around you. I would say, to sum up, Jeanette, what you said is, it really, we've seen a much more cooperative, a much greater willingness to give on issues where in the past they would have dug their heels in. So that's probably the main benefit I've seen from all of this.
I appreciate that that image of pliability as an important contribution for organizational resilience. Yeah, that's nice, Roger. Other thoughts on this? Other ahas you might have had in working with the board? Yeah, Kim, go ahead.
People being willing to give each other feed is something that happens often when you reinforce the idea that boards are responsible for each other, and the governance comes from within the board. I think that the comfort with holding each other accountable and providing feed can make a huge.
Thanks.
I think one of the ahas that I had going through was, I mean, we talked about relationship building, but it gave me a better sense of the hat that I was wearing at that point in time. And it was not necessarily the ONG hat, it was the Okie 811 hat. And I think as we went through the practices, you saw more and more people kind of have that aha moment where it was, okay, we're talking about Okie 811 right now. While we're still representing the interest of our industries and making for sure that we're bringing that diversity to the table, that this is the hat we need to be wearing right now. And this is the common goal that we need to be working towards.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, I would just repeat what Drew said, because I actually saw that happen after our retreat, where we had to talk about our fee schedule and how we're going to have to adjust costs for our operators. And it's hard because Drew's saying, I don't want to have to increase my cost. I want to lower my cost. And then we're like, yeah, ONG does want to lower their costs, but okay, well, one, we still have to, fund the budget, and we're not making money. We're a nonprofit, but we have to fund the budget. And so I saw it almost immediately, like their light bulbs turning on, like, okay, I've got to put my okay one hat on here. I can't be just talking about my industry or my company. So.
Yes. So the board members become aware of the ecosystem that they're in, that they operate within. That's really important. Thank you for that. This has been a beautiful conversation, and I would like for each of the panelists to think about some of their takeaways, maybe some of the things that they've thought about that have arisen and emerged as we've had this conversation together. That'll also give our participants who are in the team in the meeting with us time to put some of their questions in the chat. So if there are some other things that we want to bring into the conversation as we're wrapping up, we can make sure we have time to do that. So I would encourage the participants, if you have questions or insights or thoughts you'd like to add, to please drop that in the chat so we can bring that into the discussion. Oh, great. I see a question. Douglas has a question. How do we get the alternates to be more involved? If the alternates are more involved, we can see their interest and understand that they might be the right person to fill the seat if the board member resigns. But if they're not involved, they're just a name on paper and we don't get to know them. So Roger, I think that question is probably steered to you. How do you engage those alternate board members just as equally as you do your regular board members?
Within our board, we have, we have working committees. Within those working committees, every board member is obligated to participate on 2. Every alternate's obligated to participate on 2 committees different from their board member. Okay, so of the 6 or 7 operating committees that we have within the board, I think getting alternates to participate in those committee meetings, getting them assigned to a committee different than their trustee or different than their board member, is the way to do that. you keep them engaged because every quarter those meetings are taking place leading up to a board meeting. And so they're constantly being given information, they're participating, they're engaged, they're up to speed. And a lot of times, board members will bring their alternates to the board meetings, and then they're engaged there as well. So I think that your effective operating committees within your board, and then making it mandatory that to serve as an alternate, you have to participate on a number of them.
So that involvement throughout the governance structure, specifically on the committee structure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that all starts with a commitment to serve. Every board member and every alternate has to sign a commitment to serve that lays out their responsibilities to the organization. And so that's how you start that conversation.
Oh, thank you, Roger. Jason is asking a question in the chat, which I think is good for the whole panel to weigh in on. So how do we get seasoned boards re-energized and contributing at a much higher level so that they're sharing knowledge and creating content and taking an idea to the finish line? I think I've seen this in nonprofit, right? In lots of boards where there's a lot of ideas shared, but not a lot of finish lines crossed. So what are some ways that we can energize a seasoned board?
Well,
Susan, you've done
here again, I would say getting them involved in the meetings. I mean, like what I've done is on the agenda, I put a board member's name next to the agenda item. You're responsible for this particular agenda item, so that they come prepared with that. They're ready to discuss it, whatever that agenda item is. That gets them involved, that gets them engaged. Again, going back to a board retreat where you get to know each other at a different level, that re-energizes even the seasoned board members who've been there for a long time, who, tend to just come and take the back seat. Get them involved in those activities that a facilitator brings in, and they start to get re-energized. I've seen it. I mean, I've seen some of our seasoned board members, they come to these retreats and they're like, this is why I serve on this board. This is energizing. This is getting me going again. So it's an investment that you have to make and make it a priority.
Thank you, Susan. I would like to echo that importance of a retreat and having a facilitator that can help steer that relationships. And I also would like to add that I think when a board of directors has worked together to set the strategic goals and the vision for the organization, they're also more likely to contribute to the energy and the fulfillment of those. So I'd like to also just echo the theme of the importance of a strategic plan that has been worked on with the board of directors in the process. Drew or Kim, what are some of the other things that came to your mind on this question?
Sure, I have a thought. Go ahead, Roger.
I'm sorry. For me,
Okay.
One of the things we do, there's several executive directors who invite board members to their meetings. So, like, I'll take some of these board members who maybe aren't as engaged. I'll take them to a Pennsylvania board meeting, and they see how Pennsylvania operates. Or Pennsylvania may bring a couple board members to us. I just took a couple board members to Michigan's annual meeting in January, and this reinvigorates those guys. Being able to see how another board, especially if it's a younger board or an older board, how are they handling things? And it gives them ideas and concepts. So I call it the board member exchange program, but there's several of us executive directors that do that. And it's been very effective at re-energizing older board members.
So finding ways to learn from each other across the network. Really beautiful.
If nothing else, it's peer pressure.
Drew, what are some of your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, everybody's hit some really good points, and I think all of the first level points that they've hit are spot on. I think if you can't continue to get them re-energized and contributing, I think having the courage to have that conversation with them about whether they're the right person for their company at that point in time or not, and if they need to have someone else backfill their role, because ultimately, if you're not engaged in that board, you're not doing that company you're not doing right by the company. So you need to make for sure that
Mm.
you are engaged, that you're contributing to that board, and otherwise, you need to raise your hand as a board member and say, this isn't for me anymore, or you're going to ultimately force the executive's hand and make them have a conversation that they likely don't want to have. But ultimately, I think it's having the courage to hold those board members accountable.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all of the thoughtful responses today, the richness of this conversation, the sincere engagement, so that this is one of the ways that we share knowledge across this industry and learn from each other. So I hope that through the stories and practices that the members who've gathered are deeply appreciative of all of the information that you've shared as well. We're at time, unfortunately. But I think this is a good space to wrap up as we think about the engagement and the practices that have been offered here. And that was a great question for us to go out on. So thank you all very much.
Thanks to all of you, our panelists, and our moderator for sharing your expertise. Please take a moment now to fill out a brief survey that will be posted in the chat so we can continue to improve these discussions and address topics that are important to you. Be sure to register for next month's Town Hall by visiting our website. Again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next month.